Good afternoon. My name is Kemetia Foley, and I want to welcome you to today's admin chat. Today's topic, professionally navigating changes in company culture. Now, we've certainly seen changes in our company's culture over the last 20 months. And when we think about culture, I think some of us think like I do, which was I thought company culture was whether they have happy hours or whether they have a relaxed dress code or how flexible they are with people being in and out. Was it a happy, like chill, super fun culture, or was it like serious and uptight? And while those are certainly parts of what a company culture can be described as, those are really atmospheres. The atmosphere of an organization, the mood of an organization, it's not necessarily what's considered the company culture. And so through this great white paper from the Society of Human Resource Management, of which I'll provide the link at the end of the presentation, they talk about understanding and developing organizational cultures. And one of the things that I loved about this white paper is it talks about the main facet of what company culture can be defined as. And they talk about company culture being a shared understanding of what's important in the organization. It's really simple, right? A shared understanding among employees and leadership, all employees, about what is important in the organization. So when we go back to that kind of stereotype of, is it important that your employees have fun and have fun things to do like outings or happy hours? If that's a shared understanding that they take work seriously but maybe play seriously, that is an understood shared company culture. So it's very interesting to think about that. And little did I know, when I started this presentation, I guess I talked about it with Lucy and Matt several weeks ago. We were talking about it, and I didn't know that by the time I came to record this presentation, it would be really kind of timely because I'm going through my own company culture change in the organization that I work for. We have a change in leadership. So some of it's going to be personally, relatable, and others will be more from a learning and shared experience perspective. So what I really want to talk about is how do you gain perspective? First of all, understand your company culture. Do you know what the shared understanding of what's important for your organization is? Do you know what it is? Is it different than the strategic mission and vision that is promoted? That never happens, right? How do you gain perspective on what's going on with your organization right now and your role within it? So certainly, as I mentioned, organizations had a culture change between pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and as it goes on, because it's not over, it's changing, and each organization and company is approaching their staffing, their company policies, their strategies differently. So what's going on? What's your role within that? How do you get perspective on that? And some companies, of course, will revert back to a more stricter culture. We'll talk about that as well. Pinpoint the main culture changes that impact your contribution as an administrative leader. What are the main things, the shared understandings of your organization that impact your contribution as an administrative leader? I can think of one right off the top of my head, but I'm not going to go into it right now. And lastly, we'll talk about some sample communications and dialogue you can use to address culture changes with your immediate supervisor, or the tone of the email that you can use to address any questions or concerns that you are recognizing. So let's talk some culture here. So let's talk about these cultural impacts over the last 20 months. Company culture, shared understanding of what's important. Do you recognize your company? Do you recognize cultural changes in your organization? Now, cultural changes can be based on staffing or a focus on product or a focus on purpose or intent. But I think that when we think about pre-pandemic of our organizations, how they functioned during pandemic and how they are currently operating, we can recognize that cultural change. The trick here is, can you see where that changes? Have your leaders changed? Has their shared understanding of how they manage changed? Has the priority of how they treat their employees changed from what has previously existed as and been stated to now? So do you recognize the changes in your company and in your leaders? Now, I can think of one particular organization that went through a very big change as a shared understanding of what was important, pandemic-wise. The culture of the organization is very hierarchical. It is decisions go up the chain of command, and they had a strict focus or a strict understanding that the important thing was for staff to be in the office. There were very limited opportunities for staff to work from home unless it was due to weather issues or extreme circumstances, because the leadership and the culture of the organization was such that the shared understanding of what was important was to have people in their seats in the office where they could be seen, where they could interact with one another, where they could collaborate if necessary. But that was not possible once the pandemic really took hold, because organizations and buildings were not allowing staff in. They weren't allowing companies to come to the building. Folks were being told to get their materials and go home with them, or administrative staff and IT had to shuffle and get people materials to work from home. There were a whole onslaught of technological implementations, both for security purposes, privacy, and for just basically equipment that had to take place. So think about this. If you had an organization that was a desktop-bound office set, hierarchical, pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic had to change the company culture to embrace the opportunities for buying new equipment that was mobile, allowing staff to work from home, and the decision-making could be made without as much collaboration. And the interesting thing is when you look at those companies, this company has gone back to the office. They follow guidelines for spacing and mask wearing as appropriate. They are still having annual meeting. But that company culture is permanent. That company culture is permanent to the point of the current leadership. They want people in an office environment. Now, you don't have to delve into the reasons as to why, but that is the company culture. It's a shared understanding that that's truly important to the organization for collaborative purposes. They want their staff in an office where they can interact and collaborate face-to-face. Now, there will be organizations that will have made that change to go to work from home on a more permanent basis, or a work from home on a flexible basis. And they may never go back to a strict hierarchical in the office 5 days a week culture. We don't know. We're not through this yet, right? We're still in the midst of it. So when you think about those cultural changes in your company, do you recognize the change? Do you recognize if it's temporary or permanent? You may not know. And then we think about, well, pinpoint the stressors of your organization, industry, financially, staffing. One of the biggest stressors we see in the restaurant industry is the staffing issue. And it's an industry-wide issue. But look at the organization industry that you are in. Have you gone through mergers? Have you gone through leadership changes? Have you faced financial challenges or supply chain challenges as a company, as an organization? That would impact the company culture. Now, one of the really interesting things I thought from this Society of Human Resource Management presentation or white paper was when they talk about the company culture of function. So if you think about it, organization has different function departments: IT, human resources, administration, sales, marketing, research, development, manufacturing, whichever those are. And when they talk about visiting these small functional areas, the recognition that employees from those different functions in the company think that their functional areas are the ones that drive the organization. So if you think about stressor, and everyone handles, there's organizational stress and then there's personal stress within the organization. Think about IT thinking that we're the most important function that this company has, period. And manufacturing is thinking, if we don't have product, we're the most important function in this company, period. And then you have marketing thinking, well, if we're not selling, we're the most important function in this company. And then you have finance thinking, we're the most important function in this company because we're going to keep the company running and move money around and bring money in and handle the financial situation. So I think that's a very interesting look at a culture at a departmental level. And if you're looking at it from a shared understanding of what's important, if it's not communicated from the top of the organization, the leadership of the organization, that the shared understanding is that all functions within the company are vital and important, then you're going to have that kind of sibling rivalry among departments. And did that change during the pandemic? Did that culture change? Did it become more evident that there was that sort of departmental sibling rivalry? Or did functions actually come together to support the changes that the company was going through? And we are the eyes and ears of our organizations. We see and hear everything. And so being able to see that from a global perspective, from that kind of center of the spoke, center of the wheel perspective, we can see that those stressors, not only in our colleagues, in our leadership, but if we're intuitive enough, we can see them within the organization when things are really starting to give. We can usually see that. The next thing is to think about what's the priority. As an administrative leader, what is your priority for navigating this cultural change? And when there's a big change in leadership or process or procedure or a change in your department and staffing or a change of assignments, what's your priority? What's the priority in the shared understanding of the company? Most likely, it's to be adaptable flexible to address the needs of what it needs to do to sustain itself. And what's the priority of the organization at that point? Can you recognize what it is? Has the cultural change become we must retain all of our employees, and therefore there's a change in cultural effort to create this changed culture of we're going to focus on employee retention, and our shared understanding will be that all functional areas need to support that change in culture? Is that the priority? Or is the priority that the shared understanding becomes we must cost save? We must become a cost-saving culture. That must become a priority of our organization to be a lean machine to navigate through the financial challenges of the pandemic. And is that a shared understanding communicated throughout all functional areas? And I think really good important point here is it consistent? I think that's where we find the most tension when we're going through cultural or organizational changes, is not just the atmosphere, but is it being consistently communicated and applied throughout the organization, especially if it's a global company. If it's a global company and you want your leaders in those in each location to be able to share the same message and be consistent across about what's important. Or are they going to say, we have these issues in this country and these issues in our country, and the leadership in those, or the leadership at those locations, will address the shared understanding of what's important differently. It'll be a different target. So that's kind of interesting. Now, what's our role in this as administrative leaders, and why do we need to navigate it carefully and professionally? Well, first of all, we all want to remain employed. I think most of us do. But as administrative leaders, I think one of the biggest pieces of success for us is our ability to communicate the changes that we see, the challenges that we see, and our ability to create processes and procedures to help implement those changes that our company wants to make a priority. It's a shared understanding of what's important. So, a great example would be administratively, many assistants, fill in the title that you wish to use here, are responsible for company outings, rewards, recognition programs, holiday functions, department level, and sometimes company level. They're involved in those committees, and their role is more of a task-oriented to help put it together and strategically put together these things with other members of the organization. But in this changed culture, what is your role? Do you see that you have more visibility, more responsibility, a higher level of trust of decision making from your colleagues and from your supervisor? Has it changed? Are you the person who so another example, great example, human resource culture change for annual reviews. So many organizations moved away from a single annual review to a multi-point review process throughout the year. Who communicated those changes? Who helped implement them? Who was the person? Who was the team? Who were the communicators that helped roll that out? I'm guessing it would be administrative leaders, because I need you to set up these schedules. I need you to get these booked. I need you to get these Zoom calls placed. We're not just schedulers, right? So we're communicating with our team members. They're kind So let's now talk about this conversation, this dialogue. One of the things that companies are starting to implement is an assessment of where their team, where their company culture is at, by looking at things as assessing from their employee standpoint. How do they want their annual reviews? What's working for them? What isn't? What about work time? What about all of the things, the flexibility, the equipment? What do they wish to see changed? What do they think is working right? So we see those assessments go out. If your company hasn't done a current assessment of where to get a feel or a measure of where morale, staff energy levels are, they may see it already if there's a lot of turnover, or if there is a or they're hiring a lot, the word gets out. So the company itself may look at the people that are there, if that's their shared understanding of what's important is the people that they have working for their organization, they will begin to assess and see where they need to make adjustments, hopefully, right? Now let's talk about this dialogue, how to start the conversation. Maybe that's the place you start. Can we have, this is always a tricky one, because you have to first document. Sometimes it's just what you see. You can, but I don't advise it, document what you're hearing, right? So-and-so is late all the time. They never get written up. They're not ready for the meeting. That's not your role, that's your supervisor's role. What your role is to say, if you're calendar monitoring and someone has, vacation issues are coming up, or you're running into situations where the review timing is not consistent in your team, meaning some people are getting reviewed every 4 weeks or one-on-one, and some people aren't. And that's perfectly legit to ask. If you wanted more review time or one-on-one time with your supervisor, of course you're an EA or an administrative leader, you should be getting that time already, hypothetically. But in the meantime, you have that opportunity to have that conversation, but document it, right? Just again, as I said in the earlier portion of the presentation, have your information handy, have your details, have your data, and be consistent. You can't just document it for one person. You have to document it for your whole team, or where you're seeing it on a consistent basis. Maybe you take a look at it once a month or twice a month of whatever issue. This team in IT is getting every third Friday off. We are not getting every third Friday off. Those sorts of, be consistent with your documentation. Face-to-face first. Do not send off an email. Make sure you are having that conversation. You can ask if you can catch up with them on a Zoom call or Teams or whatever video chat channel you are using as an organization, but make sure you have that face-to-face first before putting things in writing. Just kind of get a feel, right? Assess out the situation and see where those stressors might be coming up to your boss. Remember, we talked about we don't have all the information on what's going, maybe sometimes always at the leadership level. So it's good to get a sense of, your bosses, when's a good time to talk with them. When, I know people don't like the word boss, I'm sorry, but your leader, your supervisor, your manager, your business partner, fill in the blank. Make sure you have that conversation. Write out, practice what you're going to say first, because then you are comfortable with the dialogue, with the conversation. It doesn't have to be off the cuff and then you forget something you wanted to mention. Again, don't have the conversation if you are hungry, if you're angry because you're frustrated, or you're tired because you've been putting in a lot of hours. make sure you have that conversation when you are feeling your best. So what about writing this? So here's the way the dialogue could go. Here's an example. There seems to be inconsistent application to start of daytimes or length of lunch. Can I get some clarification? Within your own team, it's okay to observe that. As I mentioned, we're having inconsistent amount of times that people are meeting with you for reviews. Can I help you manage? Can I help you schedule those? Whichever way you want to approach it, make sure it's in lieu of the team and not, I'm not getting as much time as Jeff over in IT. That they don't really want to hear that comparison. It comes across as unprofessional and semi-whiny, even if it's true. Okay. Make sure you follow up with a thank you that acknowledges the conversation took place. You won't feel crazy that you had that conversation with them and they don't remember it. So follow up with the email. Thanks for talking to me about expanding our lunchtime for our entire staff. Is this something we're going to share with the whole team, or is that something you're going to bring up at our next team meeting? Don't put it on you. Put it on the manager. If they've asked you to communicate that, make sure they sign off on how you communicate that first. Again, don't write emails or correspondence when you're hungry, angry, or tired. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to, the tone of the email, that tone that I mentioned way back in the beginning, is not going to come across like you hope it would. And if it's not going the way you expect it to go, schedule a meeting with someone in leadership or HR that you trust. You have to make discern for yourself if these ups and downs and inconsistencies within your organization in terms of organizational structure or management assignments or your assignments, or whether it's benefits or flexibility, is not being consistent. You have to discern whether you think that that is a temporary thing or a permanent thing. And if you can't, then I want you to go and schedule a meeting with someone else in leadership or HR that you trust. Or if you want to go back to your immediate supervisor and say, by the way, we didn't really talk about this part of the conversation, but do you think this is going to continue on? They may not have an answer because of that decision fatigue, right? But at least you've had that dialogue out there. Remember, they're looking at things from a shared understanding of what's important. So maybe right now it's not important that everyone wears, certainly not suits, right? Most of that's gone for most people. I really think so. It may not be a shared understanding, but it may be a shared understanding that the company culture expects people to be there before the phones go live, or be online and available right at start time. The communications that they share with their customers may be, our team is always going to be ready as soon as we open. So that's a cultural thing. That's an expectation, share understanding that everyone on the team, that's being communicated, that everyone who works for this organization needs to be maybe not fully caffeinated, but ready to go as soon as the lines kick on, or you get online. So think about that conversation. Pardon me. It's not easy right now to get a good idea of what the shared understanding of what's important to an organization is. But you could probably write down for yourself what you think those things are, whether they're written in a company policy or a statement of mission and vision. What's important, again, across functional areas. What's that shared understanding? So a great example right now for me is, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, that my organization is going through a leadership change. I mean, a big leadership change. And so the CEO that I have supported is going to change. And And it's going to be all the norms and cultural understandings we had as an organization for this particular leadership are going to change. They may change small, they may change big, but they're going to change. And how am I going to navigate that? And it starts for me to be able to appropriately have that conversation with new leadership on what has been acceptable in terms of a shared understanding of work time, lunch time, vacation time, holidays. You say, well, isn't that documented in your company handbook? Well, most organizations may have a company handbook which helps communicate those shared understanding of what's important, but smaller organizations may not. And in this particular case, it's a very casual atmosphere, and it's not going to be any longer. And you know how I know that? Because the shared expectation is going to be how you show up and dress up. And unfortunately, appearance is everything. We are in person in our office. I usually, I'm good. I don't feel concerned about how I come across and how I look and how I appear, if I look professional or not. One of the things is wearing sneakers in the office. Is that going to continue to be okay? Is our culture going to be tolerant? And this is for all organizations. Will that tolerance for the inconsistency because of pandemic stressors continue? Will that continue to happen? And all of these things are really just a focus on organizational health and well-being, as well as their employees. So if they're focused on their employees, I think the Society for Human Resource Management white paper mentions whether an organization is people-oriented or task-oriented. And the organization that I work for is people-oriented with a strong lean towards sales. And your company, those abilities to keep that consistent application of standing meetings, standing reviews, customer responses, customer response approaches, all of those cultural shared understandings of what is expected, what is important, bound to be understood that right now, over the last 18 months, they've been inconsistent. Will that shift? Will it be more solidified and applied more consistently across the board? So this has been a great opportunity to talk about things that are not only current, have some resources for you. I want to share. These are the two main documents that I would refer you back to. There's a ton of information out there about organizations and employees' decision fatigue. And this white paper from the Society of Human Resource Management about organizational culture is a fascinating read. I encourage you to take a look at it when you have time and think about how it applies to your organization. Can you see what's going on and normally we can see it because we see the full picture. And how can we support that as administrative leaders through clear, concise, professional documentation and clarification and communications. We see and hear most things. We can be that person that brings those concerns or good news to our leadership and our business partners to say, do you think this is going to continue, or are we going to revert back to once we go to in office how we're going to do this? I could talk about this for a long time, but this is a short webinar today, admin chat. So let me get off the presentation here and wish you all a very good day. My contact information is below on social media. You can find me at Coffee with Kem or email me at coffeewithkem@gmail.com. Thank you. Have a great day.